शुरू। Hello, good evening everyone. This is Komal Tyagi from Team Taxman, welcoming you all to today's live session on transfer pricing. I would like to start with a brief about Taxman first. We are the leading publishers of tax and corporate laws in India. We maintain the largest and the most accurate online database on income tax, international taxation, GST, company and SEBI law, IBC, FEMA banking and NBFC, competition law, accounts and audit, and Indian acts and rules. Over the years, we have worked strenuously to offer the solutions that will continue to help you grow your practice. Our 6 decades of experience in the domain has helped us to constantly innovate and enhance our services to take the tax practice to a newer height. We have always we have also developed the national website of the income tax department, and we maintain it with the help of our tech team and the editorial. I would now welcome our speaker for the evening, Mr. Raghav Bajaj and Mr. Ujjwal. Mr. Ujjwal is Mr. Raghav Kumar Bajaj is Principal Associate in the Direct Tax Practice Group of Ketan and Company. He specializes in the matters relating to transfer pricing, digital taxation, tax dispute resolution, international tax, and advises clients in relation to tax efficient structuring of inbound and outbound investments, tax due diligence, transactional tax matters, tax treaty analysis, and related aspects. He focuses extensively on cryptocurrencies and the underlying blockchain technology also. Mr. Raghav was selected as the IPBA school for the year 2017 to attend the IPBA annual conference at Auckland. He was also named in the World Transfer Pricing Rankings. In academics, Raghav has secured all India ranks in CA and CS examinations. He is a regular contributor of articles, write ups for professional magazines and journals, and also regularly speaks at webinars and seminars. And Mr. Ujjwal is a senior associate in the direct tax team at Ketan and Company. He is a chartered accountant and works extensively with Mr. Bajaj on matters regarding direct tax litigation and transfer pricing. Thank you, sir. We are pleased to have you with us. Now, before we proceed, here are a few tips for the participants also. Number one, your mic will be on mute. However, you may post your questions in the chat box given on your right hand side. Your questions will be answered by the speakers during the session or after the session by the R&D team. A copy of the presentation and the subject matter of this webinar shall be sent to you in email for your future references. Now, without taking much time, I would request sir to address the audience and proceed. Thank you. Over to you, Mr. Bajaj.
Thank you, Taxman team, for the wonderful introduction. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar on transfer pricing overview of law. Transfer pricing, or TP as it is commonly referred to, is one of the most interesting and mind-stimulating aspect of income tax law. This is because it not only involves application of legal provisions to the facts and circumstances of a case, but also provides us an analytical opportunity to arrive at the real commercial value of a transaction. Transfer pricing provisions have been in our statute book since the year 2001. Originally, the key role of this part of income tax law was to take care of the valuation aspects of a transaction or arrangement. But with the passage of time, its role has widened manifold because now, in addition to taking care of the valuation aspects, it is also used as an important tool in the effective administration of tax law, and more importantly, in preventing the menace of base erosion and profit shifting. If we talk about the recent global consensus regarding a minimum agreed upon corporate tax rate across countries, there also TP principles have a significant role to play. And all this is happening because of the rapid pace at which cross-border transactions are taking place, or how businesses are moving from one country to another country in search of better returns, which ultimately leads to cross-country holding structures, value unlocking of intangibles, and profit extraction techniques. It is in this multi-jurisdiction economically interdependent setup that we need the TP provisions to ensure that profits are taxed in the jurisdiction where revenue generating activities are taking place, and to ensure that there is no artificial shifting of profits in related party transactions. So in terms of agenda, in today's session, we will do a 360-degree overview of TP regulations and see how they have evolved over the last 2 decades. A very important evolution has been the transition to a median-based approach in the computation of arm's length price, which we will see in the slides to come. So first, we will discuss the key concepts like what is a related party, what is an international transaction, what is a specified domestic transaction, and why are all these concepts important in the context of transfer pricing. Then we will spend some time on the aspect of most appropriate method in TP. This will be an important section because the ultimate goal of TP is to benchmark a related party transaction. And for that, you would need to have a well-defined mechanism and methodology. During the webinar, we will also learn as to what is transfer pricing study report and what does it contain, like the section on FAR analysis, economic analysis. In terms of some emerging concepts in TP, we will touch upon secondary adjustments and thin capitalization rules. And then we will also give you a walkthrough of the alternate dispute resolution mechanisms that find place in our income tax law, be it the dispute resolution panel or the advanced pricing agreements. So without any delay, let us first have a brief overview of this concept. Now, simply put, transfer pricing deals with the pricing at which one enterprise or assessee transacts with its associated enterprise. That's the terminology which is used in income tax law to refer to related parties. Now, this transaction could be of any type. It could be a transaction of sale, purchase of goods or services, or any capital account transaction also. What it seeks to check is that whether the arrangement between the related parties is such that it leads to an artificial shifting of profits from one jurisdiction to another jurisdiction. And this could be done by multiple ways, such as overpricing the expenditure or undervaluing the revenue or receivables. If we take a very basic example as appearing on the screen, suppose a company A purchases goods for 100 rupees and sells it to its associated company B in another country for 200 rupees, which in turn sells the same goods without any value addition in the open market for 400 rupees. Now, what this means is that if A had sold the goods directly to the end customer, it would have made a profit of 300 rupees in its home jurisdiction. But just by routing this transaction through B, or let me put it differently, by interposing B in between itself and the end customer, it restricted its profit to 100 rupees, thereby shifting the balance profit of 200 rupees to B's jurisdiction. Of course, the incentive to do this could be the low tax rate in B's jurisdiction. In such a scenario, the transaction between A and B is artificially arranged and not governed by market forces. And this causes a lot of economic damage to A's jurisdiction. So to tackle this menace, TP provisions come into play as they seek to ignore the element of non-commerciality or artificialness in a related party transaction. So to understand how this is done, let us proceed further. But before we do that, we must be cognizant of how the transfer pricing landscape has evolved in India over the last 2 decades. As I said earlier, TP provisions were introduced in our income tax law in 2001 in relation to international transactions. The memorandum to the finance bill of that year stated that the rationale for introducing TP was to curb tax avoidance by abuse of transfer pricing. It proceeded on the presumption that the profits derived by multinational groups can be controlled by manipulating the prices that are charged in intra-group transactions. And hence, to ensure a reasonable, fair, and equitable share of profits and tax in India, the TP framework got introduced. The next major reform in TP landscape happened in 2009 when the alternate dispute resolution mechanism of dispute resolution panel, that is DRP, was introduced to provide an alternate mechanism which will facilitate expeditious resolution of disputes on a fast-track basis. 2012 saw another set of some significant amendments to the TP landscape, whereby the TP provisions were made applicable on certain specified domestic transactions. The alternate dispute resolution mechanism of advanced pricing agreements was also introduced in 2012 to reduce TP disputes and ensure more certainty for taxpayers. Then in 2013, in another move to reduce TP disputes, the government brought in the safe harbor rules, in terms of which certain acceptable ranges of margins and profitability were prescribed. As is evident, given that transfer pricing can be highly subjective, the lawmakers were making all the efforts so that TP regulations do not become an impediment in the smooth and seamless manner of business operations. Then in 2014, the concept of multi-year data and range was added in TP law so that a more widespread set of data can be used to compute the arm's length price of a transaction. And so that transactions which are undertaken within certain prescribed tolerable ranges are not subject to adverse consequences. The years 2016 and 2017 saw important amendments in our TP law to reflect the global commitment as part of OECD's BEPS action plan so that aggressive international tax planning or tax avoidance strategies are plugged. For example, be it the introduction of country by country reporting mechanism or the concept of secondary adjustment, or be it the entry of thin capitalization rules in Indian income tax law. So as you can see, our TP law has evolved significantly over the past 2 decades. What started as a basic set of arm's length principles in relation to international transactions led to the introduction of different alternate dispute resolution mechanisms from time to time, and thereafter some significant amendments like CBCR, secondary adjustment, to echo the global sentiment at OECD level. Now that we have had a brief overview of how our TP landscape has evolved over the years, let us move to the second segment of our session where we will go a little deeper into the different aspects of transfer pricing law. The first and the foremost point that we must take note of is that transfer pricing provisions are anti-avoidance provisions and can be found in Chapter 10 of Income Tax Act. This is evident from the chapter title itself, which is Special Provisions Relating to Avoidance of Tax. So the whole genesis and crux of TP provisions can be interpreted from Section 92 itself. Essentially, it provides that if a taxpayer has entered into an international transaction with an associated enterprise, then for the purpose of computing income from such international transaction, the arm's length price or ALP, as it is commonly referred to, will be taken into account. What this means is that regardless of the actual value at which a taxpayer has undertaken an international transaction, when it comes to computing the taxable income, the ALP of the transaction will be considered. Broadly speaking, ALP refers to the price at which a person will transact with an unrelated party. How will it be computed is also specified in the TP provisions, and we will discuss that also in the coming slides. Now, since the core requirement for falling within the ambit of ALP requirement is that there should be a transaction with a related party, it is no brainer that the definition and identification of an associated enterprise becomes vital. This is because once a transaction party is out of the purview of AE, the transaction goes out of the entire gamut of TP provisions. Income Tax Act prescribes two types of tests for identifying whether two parties would be regarded as related parties. The first test is the participation test, which means that direct or indirect participation in management, control, or capital of an enterprise would make them AEs. Interestingly, this covers not only direct level participations, but indirect level participation also. For instance, if A participates in B's management and B participates in C's management, then from C's perspective, both A and B will be regarded as AEs. Similarly, let's say A has two subsidiaries, B and D, and they have C and E as their subsidiaries. So in such a scenario, from C's perspective, even D and E will be regarded as AEs as they have a common control in the form of A. Subsection 2 of Section 92A contains the second test in relation to identification of AEs, the objective test. Now, unlike the participation rule, which has a big element of subjectivity, this test is objective and provides different quantitative thresholds, which, if met, would lead to the two taxpayers being deemed as associated enterprises. For this purpose, it classifies the relationships between enterprises into four categories, that is capital, management, activities, and control, and different quantitative thresholds are prescribed for each type of relationship. For instance, with respect to capital, law prescribes that a 26% share capital ownership makes the enterprises as related parties. If the loan given by one enterprise to other enterprise is 51% of the book value of debtors' assets, then also the enterprises will be deemed as related parties. Similarly, if one taxpayer guarantees at least 10% of the total debt or borrowings of the other party, the related party test is met. If we talk about management, Section 92A2 prescribes that the appointment of more than 50% of directors of an enterprise by another enterprise makes them related parties. In terms of activities, TP provisions provide that if the business of one enterprise is wholly dependent on the use of IPRs of another enterprise, they will be deemed to be related parties. Similarly, instances of captive suppliers also fall under this ambit. Then, if the sales price of one enterprise are influenced by the other enterprise, then also the deemed aid aspect gets triggered. And then we have a residuary category, which states that if two enterprises are controlled by the same individual, then they will also be regarded as associated enterprises for the purpose of TP provisions. Since the most basic requirement for TP provisions to trigger is the establishment of a related party relationship between taxpayers, it is essential that a careful analysis is conducted to ascertain whether the associated enterprise test is being met in a particular case. Now, this is crucial from a reporting perspective also, because income tax law requires taxpayers to disclose not only the name of an associated enterprise with which it has entered into the international transaction during the concerned financial year, but also to disclose the nature of relationship with that enterprise in terms of Section 92A2. The next important aspect in TP is the meaning of international transaction. Like the meaning of AEs, this concept is also very important, because unless there is a transaction with a related party, TP provisions will not have any impact on the taxable income of a taxpayer. Now, Section 92B states that an international transaction is a transaction between two or more associated enterprises, either or both of whom are non-residents. As you can see, this is a very basic definition of international transaction. It also provides that transaction includes an arrangement, understanding, or action in concert, whether or not it is formal or in writing, or whether or not it is intended to be enforceable by legal proceeding. So what this means is that the focus and the thrust of this definition is on the substance and real commercials of a transaction rather than its mere form. Just like the definition of associated enterprises contained different categories of relationships which can be there between two enterprises, the definition of international transaction also provides a list of commercial transactions which will fall within the ambit of this definition and thus trigger TP. The broad buckets of transactions mentioned in this section can be bifurcated into tangible property, intangible property, capital financing, provision of services, business restructuring. With respect to tangible and intangible property, the types of transactions that are covered are similar. It talks about transactions in the nature of purchase, sale, lease, etc. Interestingly, the section also contains a very wide definition of intangible properties. In relation to capital financing, the typical transactions of borrowing, lending, guarantee, debt, deferred payments have been included within the ambit of an international transaction. If we were to talk about provision of services, law provides that services like market research, technical services, consultancy, legal, accounting services will trigger TP provisions. And then Section 92B also provides that if two enterprises enter into a business restructuring or reorganization, then that will also be regarded as an international transaction. In recent times, where corporate M&A and business restructuring activity has picked up a lot of pace, this clause in the definition assumes significance. The next concept that we must understand in TP is deemed international transaction, or DIT as it is commonly referred to. Now, given that the thrust of TP provisions is that there has to be a related party transaction in the first place, this is a slight deviation because it deems transactions between unrelated parties also as a related party transaction, and the necessary consequences to follow. Now, since the bare definition of this provision can be a little confusing, let us understand this with the help of an example. So let's say there is an entity A and it has an associated enterprise. Now, till now, what we have understood is that transactions between A and its AE will be regarded as an international transaction. That is a related party transaction for the purpose of TP law. Now, this is a plain vanilla scenario. What DIT provision states is that A's transaction with any third party can also be deemed as a related party transaction if there is a prior agreement between the third party and A's AE in relation to such transaction, or the terms of such transaction are determined in substance between the third party and A's AE. Interestingly, Section 92B2 also states that this provision will get triggered even if such third party is an Indian entity. What this could mean is that a transaction between two unrelated Indian entities will also be deemed as an international transaction if the condition of prior agreement or determination of substance of the transaction is met. I think the logic behind the presence of such a deeming fiction is to ensure that taxpayers cannot come out of the TP net by merely interposing another enterprise. Evidently, this is an important definition, and hence, in corporate structures having multiple entities spanning over different jurisdictions, it should be ensured that the aspect of DIT has been evaluated properly by a subject expert. Now, why this evaluation and assessment becomes important and crucial is from a reporting and disclosure perspective also. As you can see on the slide, the TP law contains an express requirement to disclose a deemed international transaction, wherein the details like name, address, etc. of the third party are asked. The description of the transaction are also asked. Till now, we have spoken about the scope of TP provisions in relation to international transactions. In the year 2012, certain specified domestic transactions were also brought within the ambit of transfer pricing. To ensure that small taxpayers do not get burdened with this provision, a monetary threshold was also prescribed in this section. Essentially, this covered transactions related to profit-linked incentives. Earlier, it covered transactions in terms of Section 48(2)(b) also, but in 2017, those transactions were removed from this definition. Now, related party transactions of a new manufacturing company, which avails the concessional tax rate of 15%, have also been brought within the ambit of this section. In terms of monetary threshold, TP law provides a threshold of 20 crore rupees for the aggregate of such transactions. Prior to 2015 amendment, the monetary threshold was 5 crore rupees. Now we move to the computational aspects of TP law, because ultimately the objective of transfer pricing law is to compute what is the arm's length price or of a related party transaction. In basic terms, if a taxpayer has entered into a transaction with its associated enterprise for, let's say, 100, TP provisions seek to calculate what is the ALP of this transaction. That is, at what price would such taxpayer have entered into the same transaction with an unrelated party. How you compute this ALP can have a lot of subjectivity in terms of the method of computation. And hence, to reduce the element of prejudice to some extent, Section 92C prescribes certain methods which are to be used for computing the ALP of a transaction. This is one of the most important aspects of TP law, because it is a settled position that ALP determination without following any of the prescribed method while making any transfer pricing adjustment is not tenable. Hence, whenever any taxpayer finds a TP adjustment in its case, they should check whether the method used to arrive at the ALP is as per the mandate of Section 92C, and whether the same has been applied in the manner that has been laid down by TP law. Undoubtedly, there will be instances where amongst these methods also multiple methods may appear relevant or appropriate for a transaction. Therefore, to deal with such situations, Section 92C gives the concept of most appropriate method, which means that the method which is most appropriate for the transaction in question. In other words, it underlines the concept of first amongst equals in the selection of method for computing ALP. Rule 10C provides that the most appropriate method shall be the method which is best suited to the facts and circumstances of each particular case. The different methods that are prescribed under Section 92C for the purpose of computing ALP of a transaction are comparable uncontrolled price method, which is commonly referred to as CUP, resale price method, cost plus method, profit split method, transactional net margin method, which is commonly referred to as TNMM, or such other method as may be prescribed by the CBDT. Now, in terms of income tax rules, this other method shall be any method which takes into account the price which has been charged or would have been charged for the similar or same uncontrolled transaction under similar circumstances. Now, even though the end objective of all these methods is to compute the ALP of a transaction only, each method has its own set of application principles and guidelines which make it unique in nature. And hence, while making a choice of the most appropriate method, one will need to take into account a whole host of factors. In this regard, Rule 10C comes to the rescue and contains some guiding factors which shall be taken into account in selecting the most appropriate method. For instance, the nature and class of the transaction, the class of associated enterprises entering into the transaction and the functions performed by them, the availability and reliability of data, the degree of comparability, the extent to which reliable and accurate adjustments can be made to account for differences between the transaction in question and the comparable uncontrolled transaction, and the nature, extent, and reliability of assumptions that are required to be made. Now, with this background, let us now do a deep dive analysis into the manner of application of each method, which is provided in Rule 10b. And I'll request my colleague Ujjwal to throw some light on the different methods. Ujjwal?
Thank you, Raghav. So first and foremost is the comparable uncontrolled price method, well known as CUP method. CUP method is considered as one of the traditional transaction methods of determining ALP. So broadly speaking, what this method does is it considers taxpayer's related party transaction and seeks to compare that price with the price charged by taxpayer from an unrelated party for similar products, which is known as internal CUP, or with the price which are charged by some other entities for similar products, that is known as external CUP. The difference between both these variants of CUP method is that in internal CUP, transaction between one of the AEs and unrelated parties used for comparison, whereas in external CUP, transaction between two unrelated parties is used for comparison. For example, A is a dealer in pencils. A sells 100 pencils to its AE B for a price of 1 each. A also sells the same set of pencils to independent company for a price of 2 each. In such a case, LP of pencil under CUP method would be INR 2, and accordingly, TP adjustment of INR 1 will get triggered in the hands of A Limited for selling pencils to B for INR 1. Here, LP is determined using internal CUP because we have compared A's transaction with its related party with that of A's transaction with an unrelated party. Under external CUP, what we compare is the price at which goods are sold by taxpayer to its related party with similar goods that are sold between two independent parties. Hence, internal CUP is most preferred. This is mainly due to the availability of data. External CUP is not generally preferred because it is difficult to gather data of third parties. This method also requires high degree of comparability or similarity on all aspects such as product, services, terms of the transaction, be it contractual or economic, between the products that are being compared. Typical transactions in respect of which CUP method is generally adopted are transfer of goods, royalty payments, interest on loans, commission payments to AE. Next method is cost plus method. This method compares and identifies the markup earned on direct and indirect costs incurred with that of unrelated comparables. For example, A Limited has purchased some semi-finished goods of rupees 100 from third-party supplier, and after purchasing the same, it has made some value addition, be it in the form of packaging, labor, logistics of rupees 50, and after adding some gross margin, it has sold it to its related party A Incorporation for a price of INR 200. In this scenario, gross profit margin of A Limited can be compared with gross profit margin of third-party comparables involving selling similar products. Cost plus method is generally used in transaction relating to provision of services, joint facility arrangements, transfer of semi-finished goods, long-term buying and selling arrangements. Next method is resale price method. This method is used in cases where goods are purchased or services obtained from related parties are resold or provided to unrelated parties without any substantial value addition. For example, A Limited purchased goods from its AE for a price of INR 80, and without making any substantial value addition, it resold such goods to third party for INR 100. In this method, gross profit margin of earned by A Limited is compared with gross profit margin of third party that are involved in providing similar goods or services, or gross profit margin of A Limited in an uncontrolled transaction. RPM can be the most appropriate method in case of normal risk distributor who is awarded a reasonable level of gross margin for the functions performed. Notably, this method may not be suitable in case of reverse scenario, that is, when goods purchased by an enterprise are resold to its AE. In that case, resale price method should not be applicable. Next method is profit split method. Under this method, combined net profits of associated enterprise arising from an international transaction is split between respective entities based on their relative contribution to net profits. Typical transactions where the profit split method may be used are transactions involving integrated services provided by more than one enterprise. For example, where the activities performed by an Indian consultancy company and its foreign AE in relation to a merger and acquisition transaction for its client are so interrelated or interconnected that it may not be possible to segregate them. Second, the transfer of unique intangibles. For example, where two associated enterprises contribute their respective intangibles to develop a new product or process and earn income from such product or process. Next method is TNMM. This method is one of the most preferred and practical method used by taxpayers. It compares the net level operating profit margin realized by an enterprise from a related party transaction vis-a-vis net level operating profit margin realized from sale of similar goods by such enterprise to a third party, or operating profit margin from sale between similar enterprises in an unrelated transaction. The net level operating profit margin is computed as a percentage of appropriate base such as cost, sales. As can be seen from table appearing in the screen, operating profit margin earned by taxpayer from a related party transaction is 11.81%, which is more than the operating profit margin earned by taxpayer from sale of similar goods to third party, that is 10%. Thus, the transaction can be said to be at arm's length. The key advantage of TNMM is that there is often data available in public domain about the net profits of comparable independent businesses earned from their trading activities in comparable markets with other third parties. Typical transactions where the transaction net margin method may be adopted are provision of services, distribution of finished goods where resale price method cannot be applied, transfer of semi-finished goods where cost plus method cannot be applied. Last method is other method. Other method can be anything by which we can justify the price at which the transaction with the related party has been entered into. This method provides flexibility to determine the prices in complex transactions where third-party comparables are not available. The wide coverage of other method also provides flexibility in determining arm's length prices, particularly in cases where application of the 5 specific methods is not possible due to reasons such as difficulty in obtaining comparable data due to uniqueness of transactions such as business transfers, transfer of unlisted shares, etc. However, it would be necessary to justify and document the reasons for a rejection of all other 5 methods while selecting the other method as the most appropriate method. Interestingly, OECD TP guidelines also permit the use of any other method and state that the taxpayer retained the freedom to apply methods not described in OECD guidelines to establish the prices, provided those prices also satisfy the arm's length principle. Data which may be used for comparability purposes and which could justify the transaction between AEs at arm's length could be third-party quotations, valuation reports, standard rate cards, etc. For example, an Indian company buys back its equity shares issued to its foreign company. For this purpose, Indian company obtains a valuation report from an external firm identifying the fair market value of these shares and purchases the shares at the value determined in a valuation report. This value denotes the price that would have been charged if a third party would have bought the same shares. Hence, the Indian company could use other method and rely upon the valuation report to demonstrate that this transaction is at arm's length. So this was all about the manner of application of different methods used for determining ALP of the transaction, the scenarios in which they can be helpful, and now I will request Raghav to explain us the remaining aspect of transfer pricing law. Over to you, Raghav.
Thank you, Ujjwal, for taking us through the different methods of ALP determination. I think the key takeaway is that each method has its own manner of application, and depending upon various factors, the choice of most appropriate method will be made. This becomes relevant not only from the perspective of computing the arm's length price of a related party transaction, but also from the reporting perspective. So in the next few slides, we will have a look at the extracts of the actual Form 3CEB, which is required to be filed in pursuance of Section 92E of Income Tax Act. Section 92E states that every person who has entered into a related party transaction during a financial year shall obtain an accountant's report in Form 3CEB and furnish such report within the prescribed timeline. This is a very important compliance requirement because non-compliance with this provision triggers penal consequences. Typically in transfer pricing assessments, Form 3CEB is the first piece of information that is looked into by tax authorities, as it gives a bird's eye view of a taxpayer's related party transactions transfer pricing policies, and hence one cannot overemphasize the importance of this form. A close look at this form shows us that what does it actually assert. So in this form, the transfer pricing accountant confirms having examined the accounts and records of the taxpayer in relation to its related party transactions. The TP accountant then expresses an opinion that basis such examination, it appears that proper information and documents as are prescribed have been kept by the taxpayer in relation to its related party transactions. And then it confirms the basic that basis the management representations, the particulars that have been furnished are true and correct. Form 3CEB consists of three parts. Part A contains the general details about the taxpayer, like its name, address, PAN, concerned year, nature of business activities, and aggregate value of related party transactions, as you can see on the slide. Part B contains details in respect of the taxpayer's international transactions. So as a first step, it asks for details of AEs with whom the taxpayer has entered into the transactions. Importantly, it makes a reference to the nature of relationship between the parties that we saw earlier in the seminar. Hence, it is vital to identify the nature of related party relationships so that the taxpayer is in compliance with this aspect of the law. Then the form contains specific questions categorized according to the nature of related party transaction, like tangible and intangible property, provision of services, lending or borrowing of money, transactions in the nature of guarantee, transactions in the nature of securities, business restructurings, reorganizations, etc. And these are all actual extracts from Form 3CEB that we are showing on the screen. And for each category, there are different questions. Now, while some questions would be unique to a particular type of transaction category, the common questions for each category are details of the related party transaction, details of the related party with whom the transaction that has been undertaken, description of the transaction, transaction amount, and the method that has been used for determining ALP in terms of Section 92C. And then lastly, Part B makes a reference to deemed international transactions or DITs, wherein the taxpayers are required to disclose the details of the deemed international transactions, as you can see on the screen. Part C contains details in respect of taxpayers' specified domestic transactions. Just like Part B, this part also asks for details of AEs with whom the taxpayer has entered into transactions, along with the nature of their relationship. And then just like Part B, this part also contains specified questions according to the nature of related party transactions that are covered within the scope of Section 92BA. Essentially, the questions in this part are similar to the questions that are there in Part B. So to sum up, what Form 3CEB does is that it summarizes the entire transfer pricing position of a taxpayer in one form, because it not only contains the details of the related parties, it also spells out details of the nature of the relationship, description of the transaction, quantification of the transaction, and last but not the least, disclosure about the most appropriate method that has been used for computing the ALP. Hence, logically, this form becomes an important document for any stakeholder if it wants to study a taxpayer from transfer pricing perspective. Moving on to the next topic, Section 92CE consists of secondary adjustment. Now, it was introduced in the Income Tax Act in the year 2017. It states that where a transfer pricing adjustment exceeding 1 crore rupees is made by the tax authorities is accepted by the taxpayer is required to repatriate the amount of adjustment back to India from its non-resident related party. In the event such amount is not repatriated within 90 days of passing of the assessment order, it will be treated as an advance given by the Indian company to its non-resident related party, on which interest income is required to be imputed in the hands of the Indian company as per prescribed rules. As an alternative to repatriation of money to India, the Indian company in whose hands the adjustment is made can choose to pay additional tax at an effective rate of approximately 21% on the amount of transfer pricing adjustment made by the TPO in his order. For instance, if a transfer pricing adjustment of, let's say, 2 crore rupees is made by the transfer pricing officer and the same is accepted by the taxpayer, then in addition to any tax liability arising on such adjustment at the applicable corporate tax rate, the taxpayer can choose to pay 4.2 million rupees to avoid the entire income adjustment or repatriation of 20 million rupees to India. Implementation aspects like rate of interest to be used for computing secondary adjustment, the period for which interest is to be imputed can be found in Rule 10CB of the income tax rules. In essence, what this provision seeks to do is that it forces the taxpayers to repatriate the amount of TP adjustment to India, failing which it will be regarded as a deemed advance and subject to interest imputation in the hands of Indian enterprise unless it opts for the alternate mechanism of paying additional income tax. The next important section in transfer pricing is section 94B, which limits the quantum of deduction for interest expenditure that can be claimed by a taxpayer in certain situations. In common parlance, it is referred to as thin capitalization rule. As per this provision, an Indian borrower, which also includes the PE of a foreign company, would not be permitted a deduction of interest exceeding 30% of the EBITDA if the total amount of such interest exceeds 1 crore rupees per year. This rule is also applicable in relation to interest payments to a non-resident AE or a third-party lender to whom non-resident AE has provided guarantee or matching funds. However, such interest can be carried forward for 8 financial years and a deduction shall be allowed to the extent of maximum allowable interest expenditure for the relevant year. Since debt funding is very common in multi-jurisdiction corporate structures and interest is a widely used tool of revenue upstreaming, it is always advisable to have the implications of thin capitalization rule confirmed from a subject expert, as it seeks to limit the quantum of deduction that can be claimed by the interest payer and thus leading to an increase in the taxable income. Ujjwal, would you like to give us a walkthrough of the different types of compliances that need to be undertaken by a taxpayer in India in terms of the transfer pricing law?
Sure. The taxpayer is required to undertake various compliances under the transfer pricing law and file certain reports such as Form 3CEB, Master File, etc. First compliance requirement is Form 3CEB. So every taxpayer who has entered into an international transaction with its AE or certain specified domestic transaction is required to file Form 3CEB. The due date of filing such Form 3CEB is 31st October following the financial year. That is, Form 3CEB for FY 21-22 is required to be filed on or before 31st October 2022. Next compliance requirement is Transfer Pricing Study Report. Transfer Pricing Study Report, or TPSR, is the core of entire transfer pricing. A robust TPSR helps in avoidance of unnecessary transfer pricing adjustment by the TPO. TPSR is required to be maintained if the aggregate value of international transaction entered into by the taxpayer is more than INR 1 crore. While there is no limit prescribed for maintenance of transfer pricing study report with respect to specified domestic transaction, but as we learned earlier, there is an inbuilt monetary threshold of 20 crores for applicability of specified domestic transfer pricing provisions. Thus, unless the quantum of specified domestic transaction exceeds the prescribed monetary threshold of 20 crores, maintenance of TPSR is technically not applicable. Having said so, it is recommended that such TPSR should be prepared even if the value of international transaction or specified domestic transaction, as the case may be, is not exceeding the specified limit, as it can be used to substantiate the basis on which LP has been computed. TPSR is usually asked by the TPO during the course of transfer pricing assessment proceedings. Next compliance requirement is Master File. In line with BEPS Section Plan 13, India introduced additional compliance requirements with respect to preparing and furnishing of Master File and country-by-country report in the year 2016. Every person being a constituent entity of an international group, if the consolidated revenue of such group exceeds INR 500 crore in an accounting year, and the aggregate value of international transaction during such accounting year exceeds INR 50 crores, or transaction in respect of intangible exceeds 10 crores, is required to maintain and furnish certain prescribed information and documents of the international group. This compliance requirement is called as Master File documentation. Master File documentation is required to be filed in Form 3C EAA by 30th November following the financial year. For example, Form 3C EAA for FY 21-22 is required to be filed on or before 30th November 2022. However, if there are more than one constituent entities of an international group, Form 3C EAA may be furnished by any one of the constituent entities if the international group has designated such entity for this purpose and prescribed designation form is filed at least 30 days prior to the due date of furnishing master file documentation. Every parent entity or alternate reporting entity of an international group resident in India is required to furnish a report known as country-by-country report if consolidated turnover of such international group for an accounting year exceeds INR 6,400 crores. CBC report or country-by-country report is required to be filed in Form 3C EAD within a period of 12 months from the end of reporting accounting year. Further, in the case of constituent entity resident in India, which is a part of international group and whose parent is a non-resident, is also required to file a notification form in Form 3C EAC at least 2 months prior to the due date of filing country-by-country report. Now let us understand these compliances in a more detail, and I request Raghav to take over to guide us as to what all is contemplated in transfer pricing study report.
Thank you. I think what becomes evident is that each such compliance serves a specific purpose. And since these filings are perhaps the first point of entry for tax authorities into a taxpayer's transfer pricing side of the business, it becomes crucial to ensure that utmost care and caution is taken in these filings. In this context, I would like to focus on transfer pricing study report, or TPSR as is commonly referred to. It is also referred to as benchmarking analysis report. If I have to ascribe a very simple meaning to this report, I would say that a TPSR is the justification document or code which contains the taxpayer's explanation that its related party transactions are in compliance with the arm's length test. It will demonstrate that the related party transactions undertaken by a taxpayer are on an arm's length basis, and that therefore no TP adjustment or TP addition is warranted in its case. Rule 10D of the income tax rules prescribes the list of information and documents that are to be kept and maintained by taxpayers in relation to related party transactions. While there is no preset prescribed format for a TPSR, broadly any TPSR would generally contain 4 types of sections, and they may be clubbed into different categories or sequenced differently. But the main point is that if one looks at a TPSR, these 4 types of parts would definitely be found. So a typical TP study report would start with entity-related details and information. It would not only contain a chapter on the corporate background of the taxpayer, like its group information, holding structure, etc., but also a brief description of its related parties or associated enterprises. This gives a good overview of the taxpayer's business line. Where does the taxpayer entity fit within the organizational structure? What role and purpose does it serve within the group? Who all are its related parties? And not only this, it also gives a macro level economic outlook of the industrial sector in which the taxpayer operates. For instance, I'm sure that the TP study reports of last financial year would contain a section on COVID and how it impacted business cycles across the globe. This is an important portion of the TPSR as it sets the tone and an overarching theme which must be kept in mind while evaluating any differential treatment that a taxpayer may have accorded to any of its related parties. And hence, from TP assessment's perspective, the importance of this section can, if at all, any TP adjustments are being proposed by the tax authorities. Similarly, in years of exceptional returns, be it on the positive side or on the negative side, it paints the canvas in such a manner so that any exceptional returns of a particular year are not considered as benchmark for other years. For instance, if in a particular year the demand for a company's product in its related parties jurisdiction soars high, it would be very much possible that the margins earned by the taxpayer on such related party sales are also high. But if such demand in next year does not match the preceding year's demand levels, then it would be inappropriate to apply the earlier year's high margin levels to current year sales also. The next segment that one would generally find in benchmarking reports would contain transaction related details, in as much as what type of related party transactions have been undertaken by the taxpayer. For example, whether the taxpayer has entered into a brand licensing agreement wherein the foreign AE has licensed its IPR to the Indian entity, or whether the parties have entered into any service arrangements like shared services, technical services. If there has been a debt funding or capital raising arrangement between the parties, then that will also be mentioned. Similarly, if the taxpayer and its AEs have entered into any business restructuring or corporate reorganization, then those details will also be mentioned here. Further, what is the invoicing arrangement and what are the commercial terms between the parties will also be mentioned here. like what is the rate of interest, what is the rate of royalty, what amount of fees is being charged amongst the parties. If one wants to find out the broad details of the commercial transaction, then they can be found here. For example, in the case of IPR license, whether the license is exclusive or non-exclusive, what are the territories or geographies to which it pertains. Similarly, in the case of sale purchase of goods, whether the transaction is on a CIF basis or FOB basis, what are the credit terms that the parties have agreed to, what is the currency in which the payment will be made. So all in all the details about the transaction can be found in this section. The next segment in a TPSR would generally deal with the pricing aspects. So if the taxpayer has a specific pricing policy in place, then those details would also be found. In case of multinational groups, these type of pricing policies are often found. For example, if the Indian subsidiary of a foreign group has a policy that it offers a 2% discount for payments made within 30 days, then those sort of details will be found here. Similarly, if a taxpayer has a policy whereby it offers a bulk discount of 3% in case of purchases in excess of a threshold amount, then those sort of details will also be found there. Now, why does this section becomes important is that it allows the tax authority to check as to whether a particular economic benefit, incentive, or discount is provided by a taxpayer to its related parties only or to all its customers in general. The next aspect that we would like to discuss is the FAR analysis, short form for functions performed, assets employed, and risks undertaken. Perhaps the most important and most analytical section in a benchmarking report. Similarly, the portion on economic analysis is very important. It consists about the discussion about the selection of most appropriate method for determining ALP. Given that both these sections are very important, we will discuss them in some more detail in the coming slides. And then the last section in a TPSR would contain supporting documents like official publications, reports by government, public institutions, stock exchanges, financial statements of comparables. This section will act as the supporting pillar for the report, as it will demonstrate that the assertions and averments that are made in the TPSR are based on sound material and not just abstract assumptions. To understand what is FAR analysis or what is contained in the FAR section of a TP study report, we must understand one fundamental economic principle, which is that in transactions between two independent enterprises, compensation usually will reflect the functions that each enterprise performs, taking into account the assets used and risks assumed. To put it otherwise, the functions that each enterprise performs in a commercial transaction will have a significant bearing on the price that it can charge from the other party. It is for this reason that the FAR analysis becomes extremely important, as it helps in demarcating a controlled transaction and determining the comparability between controlled and uncontrolled transactions or entities. Essentially, this analysis seeks to identify the economically significant activities and responsibilities undertaken, the assets used or contributed, and the risks that are assumed by the parties to a transaction. It focuses on what the parties actually do and the capabilities they provide. Such activities and capabilities will include decision making, including decisions about business strategy, risks. For instance, in terms of functions performed, if we take an example of a manufacturing setup, it will need to be identified as to which group entity undertakes the function of raw material procurement, product manufacture, inventory management, packaging, sales, marketing, after-sales support. And why this becomes vital is that the compensation that an entity will charge from another entity will have a direct correlation with the functions that it performs. That is to say, if an entity is performing multiple functions like raw material procurement, marketing, after-sales support, then logically in an uncontrolled setup, that entity will want to charge a higher amount as compared to an entity that performs only a select few functions. Or to put it in other words, if an entity is performing multiple functions in its related party transactions, then from a TP perspective, it should charge a higher amount of fees from its related party. Of course, this stems from the fact that for performing more functions, an entity will need to employ more assets and resources. And hence, the next point that becomes important in a FAR analysis takes into account what assets have been employed by the taxpayer entity for the purpose of performing its scope of activities. For instance, whether the assets are owned or on lease basis, whether the activity is labor intensive, whether the entity is required to keep a significant amount of capital blocked for the purpose of its related party transactions. If you note carefully, all these aspects are important because they will have a direct bearing on the amount which an entity charges from an unrelated party. If the entity is required to employ more resources or deploy more capital, then logically such an entity will want to charge such a price which can cover the costs of all the assets that have been employed by it. And that is where FAR analysis becomes relevant, because what it tests is that whether the price or amount that is charged by an enterprise from its related parties is in line with what would have been charged from an unrelated party, keeping in mind the quantum, nature, and type of assets employed. Because if there is any discrepancy, then a transfer pricing adjustment may need to be made. The third aspect that is analyzed in FAR is the risks undertaken component. This is important because typically in an unrelated party transaction, the rewards of an economic activity need to be commensurate with the risks that are undertaken. And risk can be of many types, such as financial risk, product risk, credit risk, geopolitical risk. And why does this aspect need to be weighed in while determining the ALP is because if the commercial understanding between two parties, let's say A and B, is that all the risks pertaining to the transaction will be undertaken by B, then logically the price to be paid by B to A will be nominal, even if A has employed many assets for this purpose at its premises. If we talk about financial risk, it could mean who bears the cost of capital employed in the transaction. Credit risk could mean who bears the loss of bad debts in the transaction. Then a forex risk would mean which party will absorb the losses on account of foreign exchange fluctuation. Similarly, in the case of a job work setup, the job worker will undertake the risk of its capacity not being fully utilized if the other party's work for a particular month or a particular period is less than anticipated. So, as you can see, what this aspect will let us know is that whether the compensation in a transaction is proportionate with the respective risks that have been undertaken by the transacting parties. The economic analysis section will contain a detailed explanation and rationale for selecting a particular method of computing ALP over the other methods. In other words, it will explain why other prescribed methods are not suitable for the transaction in question and the facts and circumstances of the case. From a practical perspective, this assumes immense significance because in TP assessments, often the primary fight between the taxpayer and the tax department is in relation to the choice of method. Hence, it is very important that this section is properly drafted so as to allay any potential allegations in future that the method chosen is not correct. Another important component of the economic analysis section is identification of comparables. Now, this is relevant because these would be the entities against whose prices or operating margins will the taxpayers' prices or operating margins be benchmarked. The relevance of this portion also lies in the fact that majority of TP disputes revolve around comparable selection. In this section, typically the TP accountant will start with a large database of enterprises, and then step by step, it will apply factors to narrow down the research or eliminate the non-relevant enterprises. For instance, if the taxpayer is engaged in marketing of pharma products, then the TP accountant may apply factors like which entities of the database are involved in pharma line of business, which entities are performing marketing functions. This process continues until a very precise and narrow list of comparable entities is selected. Now, it is very much possible that even after applying so many factors, one may feel that the list of comparables that has emerged does not match with taxpayers' business and scale of operation. But the point is that so long as the process of selection of comparables is scientific and properly disclosed in the report and the database is properly tagged, it should be defendable. Many times, even though an entity may seem comparable with the taxpayer entity on all fronts, like its line of business, functions performed, but not on the criteria of turnover or scale of operations, such comparables are also likely to be rejected because similarity of turnover level is also a very important criteria which can make the margins of two functionally similar entities completely different. And then comes the actual benchmarking section where the number crunching exercise takes place. In this segment of the report, the prices or margins of the comparable entities are taken and adjusted to factor in the facts and circumstances of taxpayers' business. And then basis those weighted average results, the arm's length price is calculated in accordance with the prescribed mechanism. Needless to say, this is important because whether any TP addition needs to be made or not will depend upon the results of this exercise. That is to say, whether the price charged or paid or operating margins of the taxpayer are in compliance with the arm's length test or not under the transfer pricing regulations. Now let us move to the country by country reporting segment of transfer pricing law. And for this portion, I'll request Ujjwal to give us a broad level understanding of master file and CBCR provisions.
Thank you, Raghav. Contents of master file can be broadly categorized in 4 components: details relating to business, intangibles, group financing arrangements, consolidated financial statements. In order to understand the contents, let's take an example of a reputed automobile group on which master file compliance requirement is applicable. Master file documentation requires the group to provide details relating to its businesses, such as chart depicting entire ownership structure of such automobile group, list of all entities of automobile group along with their addresses, a description of the functions performed, assets employed, and risk assumed by the constituent entities of the automobile group, that is FAR analysis, that contribute at least 10% of the revenue or assets or profits of such automobile group. What are the important drivers of profits of business of such automobile group? Details about the transfer pricing policies for intragroup services, etc. Insofar as intangibles are concerned, master file documentation requires the group to provide a description of overall strategy of the automobile group for the development, ownership, and exploitation of intangible property, a description of important transfers of interest in intangible property among entities of the automobile group, etc. Insofar as intragroup financing arrangements are concerned, master file documentation requires the group to provide a detailed description of the financing arrangements of the automobile group, including the names and address of top 10 unrelated lenders, a detailed description of transfer pricing policies of automobile group relating to financing arrangements among group entities. Other documents which are required under the master file documentation are consolidated financial statement of such automobile group, details of any tax rulings in respect of such automobile group. Next is contents of country by country report. Contents of country by country report or CBC report can be divided into 2 parts. In order to understand the contents, let's take an example of a tech MNC, a tech company being a multinational enterprise group on which compliance requirements with respect to filing of CBC report are applicable. Part A of Form 3C EAD, that is CBC report, requires such tech MNC to provide jurisdiction-wise details of revenue, profit or loss before income tax, amount of income tax paid, accumulated earnings, number of employees, etc. Part B of country by country report requires the tech MNC to provide details of all its constituent entities, their incorporation details, main business activity of such constituent entity as to whether it is involved in research and development, holding or managing intellectual properties, support services, financial services, and so on. Thus, to summarize, master file documentation contains comprehensive information relevant for all M&E group members. That is, it is an overview of M&E group business, including the nature of its global business operations, its overall transfer pricing policies, etc. Whereas country by country report consists of certain information relating to global allocation of M&E's income and taxes paid, together with certain other indicators of economic activity like revenue, capital employed, headcount, etc. of each entity within the M&E group. Next concept is tested party. Tested party means a party to the transaction on which a transfer pricing analysis will be applied. The choice of tested party is important in as much as comparables will be chosen accordingly. While this term has not been defined under the Income Tax Act, there is some bit of guidance available under the OECD TP guidelines, which states that the choice of tested party should be consistent with the functional analysis of the transaction. Tested party is the one to which a transfer pricing method can be applied in the most reliable manner and for which the most reliable comparables can be found. While practically, the taxpayers select Indian entity as tested party while benchmarking their transactions, a foreign entity could also be selected as a tested party for the purpose of benchmarking. For instance, where an Indian entrepreneur sells goods to its US subsidiary, which acts as a low-risk distributor, the US entity should be selected as tested party if reliable data of such tested party is available in public domain Thus, principles which emerge in selection of tested party are: first, the tested party should be the less complex party to the control transaction. That is, its function should be less complex, and it should be a party in respect of which most reliable data for comparability is available. There is no bar in selection of tested party. It can either be local party or a foreign associated enterprise. Having said so, Indian jurisprudence is a bit divided on selection of foreign AES tested party. Delhi bench of the tribunal in the case of Ranbaxy Laboratories has upheld the selection of foreign AES tested party. The tribunal, in doing so, has held that if the taxpayer wishes to take foreign AES tested party, then it must ensure that it is such an entity for which relevant data for comparison is available in public domain, or the same is furnished to the tax administration. Similar view has been held by other benches of tribunal also. On the other hand, Pune bench of the tribunal in the case of Kararo India Private Limited has rejected selection of foreign AES tested party on the ground that such proposition has no sanction under the Indian transfer pricing law. The tribunal in this case also remarked that how the profit realized by foreign AE can be relevant when the profit of an Indian enterprise is sought to be ensured at arm's length. Similar view was held by other benches of the tribunal also. A pertinent question which arises is whether the transfer pricing officer can make a transfer pricing adjustment solely on the ground that the need, benefit, or commercial expediency from such transaction was not proved or substantiated by the taxpayer. In this regard, key propositions which call out from various rulings that are rendered on such aspect are: first, the TPO doesn't enjoy unfettered powers under the Indian transfer pricing mechanism to disallow any expenditure or to check the necessity of the transaction. His jurisdiction is limited to ascertain whether the international transaction carried out by the taxpayer with its AE is at arm's length by applying the most appropriate method as specified under Section 92C1 of the Income Tax Act. The TPO can neither question the commercial expediency of the transaction nor can examine whether the services was needed or not. Further, the TPO cannot question the quantum of benefit derived by the taxpayer from payment made for an international transaction. Now Raghav will take you through the concept of range concept and the concept of multi-year data under the Indian transfer pricing law. Over to you, Raghav.
Thank you. So the last segment in TP law that we would like to discuss and touch upon is range and multiple layer data concept. Sorry. So a few years ago, what happened that TP law was amended to allow the use of multiple year data to have a more broad-based computation of ALP. This ensures that exceptional performances of any comparable entity in a particular year does not get used to benchmark the transactions of other taxpayers also. The other aspect deals with the range concept. Broadly speaking, what this mechanism does is it provides a range of price or margins for benchmarking a taxpayer's related party transactions. Now, to understand this mechanism, one needs to know the previous mechanism and appreciate its shortcomings. Earlier, the TP law provided that to arrive at the ALP of a transaction, average of comparables prices needs to be undertaken. The issue with mean as a measure to represent a data set is that in case of outliers, the value of the mean gets compromised and does not convey a more accurate representation of the data set. So let's say in a class of 10 students, 9 students score 1 mark and let's say the remaining 1 student scores 30 marks. So in such a situation, if we were to compute the mean of this data set, it will be 3.9. So what has happened is that because of one outlier value, the average value has gone for a toss and does not reflect the true and fair picture of the data set. So to overcome this issue in statistics, an alternate approach is used whereby the outlier values are ignored. For instance, ignore the top 10% and bottom 10% crowd. This is often called as the truncated mean concept or a median concept. Now, even our TP law has transitioned to a median concept in certain scenarios. So what the new provision states is that you ignore the bottom 35% and top 35% values. And then if the taxpayer's price or margin falls within that remaining middle range of 30% values, there need not be any TP adjustment. This is based on the premise that so long as a taxpayer's price or margin is within a broad range of its peers, then it is in compliance with the ALP test of TP law. Let us understand this with the help of some numbers. So Rule 10CA of Income Tax Rules explains how ALP is to be computed by applying this concept. So in table 1 that's on your screen, let's say the price charged by a taxpayer for its related party transactions is 100, and the five comparables have been selected. Now the prices charged by those five comparables are also shown on the slide. Since the number of comparables is less than 6, the concept of mean will be used, whereby the mean of the prices charged by these five comparables will be calculated. In this example, the mean comes to 101.6. Since the difference between the price charged and this mean is within the tolerable range of 3%, there will be no TP adjustment. If the mean would have crossed the tolerable range, then there would have been TP adjustment. Now let us consider a scenario where the number of comparables is 6 or more. So in table 2, let's say the price charged by a taxpayer for its related party transactions is 103. The prices charged by the 7 comparables are also shown on the slide. Now, since the number of comparables is 6 or more, the concept of median will be used. For this purpose, as step 1, the data set will need to be organized in ascending manner. In step 2, to identify the tolerable range, two values will need to be determined from this data set: the value for 35th percentile and 65th percentile. To compute the value for 35th percentile, we'll need to do 7, that is the number of values in the data set, into 0.35, which comes out to 2.45. Now, since this is not a whole number, the value of 35th percentile will be value corresponding to the immediately next whole number. That is the value which is corresponding to serial number 3, which comes to 102. Value for 65th percentile will also be computed in a similar manner, which comes to 105. So this is the tolerable range. What this means is that if the taxpayer's price fall within this range of 102 to 105 and both values included, it will be deemed that the taxpayer has transacted at arm's length and hence no TP adjustment is required. In the instant case, since the taxpayer's price 103 falls within the tolerable range, no TP adjustment is required. However, if the taxpayer's price fell outside of this tolerable range, let's say 99, in that case, the median of this data set would be the ALP. To compute the median, we'll need to do 7, that is the number of values in the data set, into 0.5, which comes out to 3.50. Again, since the result is not a whole number, the median will be the value corresponding to the immediately next whole number, that is the value which is corresponding to serial number 4, which comes to 103. And accordingly, there will be a TP adjustment of 4, that is 103 minus 99. In table 3, let us consider that the data set has 20 values. Price charged by taxpayer for related party transactions is 48. Since the number of comparables is 6 or more, again the concept of median will be used. And first, we will identify the tolerable range by computing the values of 35th percentile and 65th percentile that we learned a few minutes ago. Here also we'll repeat the same steps. So for 35th percentile, we'll do 20, that is the number of values in the data set, into 0.35, which comes out to 7. Now here comes the difference. Unlike table 2, the result here is a whole number. So the value of 35th percentile will be the mean of value corresponding to serial number 7, that is 47, and the value corresponding to immediately next serial number 8, that is 48. So this mean comes to 47.50. Value for 65th percentile will also be computed in the similar manner, which comes to 48.75. What this means is that if the taxpayer's price falls within this tolerable range of 47.5 to 48.75, both values included, it will be deemed that the taxpayer has transacted at arm's length and hence no TP adjustment required. However, if the taxpayer's price fell outside of this tolerable range, let's say 46, in that case, the mean of this data set would be the ALP. To compute the median, we'll do the same step, 20, that is the number of values in the data set, into 0.50, which comes to 10. Again, since this result is a whole number, the median will be the mean of value corresponding to serial number 10, that is 48.35, and the value corresponding to the immediately next serial number 11, that is 48.45. So this result comes to 48.40. So this is how the concept of range, median, mean operates in TP parlance in actuality. Till now, we have understood the various intricacies of TP law, be it identification of related parties, related party transactions, selection of comparable entities, or be it the manner of determining the arm's length price of a transaction. While the law has tried to spell out as precise objective guidelines as possible in relation to all these aspects, there is no brainer that a great deal of subjectivity is still involved in the interpretation and application of all these provisions. Resultantly, TP disputes kick in between taxpayers and tax department. In fact, TP disputes constitute a significant portion of income tax litigation in the country, and hence a large chunk of money remains locked in such issues. To lighten up the judicial burden, time and again, our Income Tax Act has been amended to provide alternate ways of dispute prevention come dispute resolution. In the next section, we will discuss such mechanisms. The first ADR mechanism that was introduced in TP context was DRP, that is Dispute Resolution Panel. It was introduced in 2009 to provide an option to certain categories of taxpayers to oppose any proposed TP adjustments in front of a dedicated collegium of 3 commissioner level officers. Now, whether a taxpayer wants to adopt the DRP route or prefer the conventional appellate mechanism of CIT appeals will depend upon the facts, circumstances, and merits of each case. But on a principal basis, from a taxpayer's perspective, generally speaking, there may be 2 main pros of adopting DRP route in terms of litigation timeline management. First is that if the DRP's order is in assessee's favor, the Income Tax Department cannot challenge the same in appeal at ITAT level. And second is the strict timelines that are prescribed for each step of DRP route. What this ensures is that if the DRP order is against the assessee will reach the ITAT level faster because appeals against DRP order will go straight to ITAT. The next type of ADR mechanism that I would like to talk about is the safe harbor rules. Safe harbor is defined as the circumstances in which income tax authorities will accept the transfer price declared by the assessee. In this regard, there are different types of transactions prescribed which are covered by safe harbor rules such as software development services, ITES, low value intra-group services, KPO services, and all these services are defined in the rules. And for each such transaction type, the level of profit margin is prescribed, which if declared by the taxpayer also will mean that the price declared by the taxpayer will be accepted by TP authorities. For instance, for software development and information technology enabled services, operating profit margins of 17% to 18% are prescribed. For corporate guarantee, the safe harbor of fee prescribed is 1% of the amount guaranteed. Basically, what this means is that safe harbor is the normal margin which the government expects that a taxpayer in the specified class of transactions or services will earn. With an objective of not leaving any room for doubt, law also prescribes the manner of computing such profit margins in terms of what all costs and expenses need to be considered. For instance, while depreciation is covered within the ambit of operating expense, interest is not permitted to be counted within the ambit of OPEX. What constitutes operating revenue of the taxpayer is also prescribed in the rules. To take the benefit of safe harbor, the taxpayer will need to apply in prescribed forms, setting out all the required details, etc. Detailed rules in relation to safe harbor are contained in Rule 10TA to 10TG of income tax rules. There one can find aspects like key definitions in relation to safe harbor, persons who are eligible to apply, eligible transactions, safe harbor margins, manner of computing costs. Further, the safe harbor rules in relation to certain specified domestic transactions are also contained in Rule 10TH to 10THD. Broadly, the transactions covered are supply of electricity or transmission of electricity or wheeling of electricity or purchase of milk or milk products by a cooperative society from its members. The next ADR mechanism that is provided in transfer pricing chapter of Income Tax Act is about advanced pricing agreements or APAs as they are called commonly. Now, as the name suggests, APA is an agreement between a taxpayer and the tax authority, which determines the ALP in advance or specifies the manner of determination of ALP in relation to a related party transaction. In terms of benefits, APA provides certainty with respect to tax outcome, minimizes the rigors of TP audit, and leads to reduction in compliance costs and administration costs. At a time, an APA can be entered into by a taxpayer for a maximum period of 5 consecutive years, and thereafter it can be renewed. The APA scheme also provides for a rollback mechanism of up to 4 immediately preceding years, in terms of which the taxpayer can apply the APA to the same international transaction already undertaken during any period. And this is very important and helpful for taxpayers as it enables them to achieve tax certainty for transactions already undertaken, thereby reducing the likelihood of TP disputes in respect of such transactions. One important aspect in relation to APAs is the concept of critical assumptions, which means the factors and assumptions that are so critical and significant that neither party entering into an agreement will continue to be bound by the agreement if any of the factors or assumptions is changed. This is an important aspect because if there is a change in any of the critical assumptions, the APA shall not be binding. APA can be either unilateral, bilateral, or multilateral. The APA applications are processed and analyzed by dedicated APA teams in the income tax department. The difference between safe harbor rules and advanced pricing agreements is that the safe harbor rule is applicable only in certain specified circumstances and provides for deemed acceptance of ALP declared by the taxpayer in those circumstances. On the other hand, the APA scheme extends an opportunity to all other taxpayers to enter into an agreement with the CBDT, which determines the ALP or specifies the manner in which the ALP is to be determined. Detailed rules in relation to APAs are contained in Rule 10F to 10T of income tax rules. There one can find aspects like key definitions in relation to advanced pricing agreements, persons who are eligible to apply for APA, application procedure, applicable fees, rollback provisions, related compliances, renewal of APA, etc. In terms of APA statistics, majority of APA applications have been for unilateral APAs, that is between the taxpayer and the CBDT. Around 300 advanced pricing agreements have been entered in total. The average time taken to conclude APAs in India is around 4 years. Service sector accounts for most of the APAs entered in India. The typical types of transactions that are covered under APA relate to payment of royalties, license fees, IT services, technical services, management services. In terms of methods, TNMM, that is the transactional net margin method, is the method which has been generally adopted in APAs. With this, we come to an end to today's webinar on transfer pricing law. So what we did, just a recap of the whole session, we discussed the key principles of TP law, ranging from identification of related parties and related party transactions to selection of comparables, determination of arm's length price. We also discussed what are the alternate dispute resolution mechanisms provided in TP law, like DRP, APA, safe harbor rules. Given that multi-jurisdiction organizations are becoming more common day by day and cross-border transactions are increasing with every passing day, transfer pricing has become one of the most important aspects of Indian income tax law. Hence, it is essential that the intricacies of TP provisions are evaluated and assessed carefully so as to not fall on the wrong side of law. One cannot overemphasize the role of a TP study report as I mentioned earlier and Form 3 CEB, because typically they provide almost all the information about a taxpayer's related party transactions, benchmarking disclosures. In some sense, one can say that it is a peephole into any taxpayer's transfer pricing side of the business. I hope that we have been able to give you a good glimpse of the transfer pricing provisions contained in our Income Tax Act. I know that time is little less, but if it's okay, then we can take some of the questions that we saw in the chat box and in the Q&A section. So there is one question on objective of CBCR. I think the objective is that it provides information to tax authorities so that they can assess the transfer pricing risks and make determinations on how their internal resources are to be allocated. Because as we discussed in the webinar, CBCR provisions contain a lot of information, and then depending on which country, whether you are in the whether you're talking about the home country, that is the parent country, parent jurisdiction, or whether you're talking about any other jurisdiction in which a group entity operates, a lot of information is shared so that ultimately the parent jurisdiction country, and for that matter every other country, can just at least have a sense of what that particular group is doing, what are their transfer pricing policies, what are the key factors or key contributors of profits, what are the types of international transactions, what are the main related party assets like IPRs, etc. and how those transactions are taking place, so that to identify that whether there is any profit shifting, artificial profit shifting being undertaken by that group. Broadly, that is the database. Broadly, that is the objective of the CBCR provisions. What is the effect of removing LIBOR by FRTR? So, this is not technically a TP, but it's sort of an economic question, but let me address it. So for everyone's benefit, RFRs are the risk-free rates, and this is something which is not a very new thing, but it has been discussed, and it has been happening in a phased manner. I think the main reason for removing LIBOR is the downsides or the shortcomings of that method, because what I understand is that LIBOR, the bank rates which were given by the different banks of the different constituent banks were the proposed rates which they wanted to pay. So it became very much possible for them to manipulate the LIBOR rates because it was not something that they will actually pay. It is something which they proposed to pay. And because of that, it became possible to tell a very low rate. So that's why I think that's perhaps one of the reasons for moving to that concept. Is there any monetary threshold for international transactions? So if you're asking for the documentation, as we saw on the slide, there is a limit of 1 crore rupees, which is prescribed for maintaining the prescribed documents in relation to international transactions. And as we said, while there is no limit mentioned for specified domestic transactions, but it is always advisable to have a robust TP study report which contains a detailed functional analysis, functional analysis taking into account the functions performed, assets employed, and risks undertaken. What evidence of TP database used for benchmarking needs to be retained for future, as databases are constantly being updated? So as I said, this is in the TP study report, the database that, and these are databases which are available fortunately with the department side also, and that will contain a whole host. If you see a TP study report, the major section is about the selection of comparables. And that process shows that, okay, if there are 2,000 entities which are taken into account, which are first identified, and then by applying the different factors, the elimination exercise takes place, that in itself will show that the database that has been used or the manner of selection of comparables is robust, is scientific, and not just based on abstract presumptions. Because the moment the adjudicating authority finds that the database that has been used, the exercise that has been undertaken, is something which is based on scientific principles, is based on credible evidence, that itself will mean that that the exercise of selection of comparables is taken in the proper manner. The ultimate page which will contain the names of finally selected comparable entities may be just 1 page or 2 pager, but if there's a TPSR of, let's say, 200 pages, I think 100 to 150 pages may be just going the names of containing the names of all those entities which have been rejected and what has been the reason for rejecting those entities. I think this is what we can see in the chat box, and since time is also full, so once again, thank you to the Taxman team for sharing this platform and providing us this opportunity to share our views on the transfer pricing law. It has been a great experience, and as I said earlier, I hope that we have been able to give you a good glimpse of the transfer pricing provisions contained in our Indian Income Tax Act.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Raghav, and also Mr. Ujjwal. Thank you for this insightful presentation. This has definitely added to our knowledge on the topic. We appreciate the subject matter, and thank you for precisely explaining it to our audience. I also thank the participants for being so cooperative. Thank you all for taking time out of your busy schedule and joining us in this session to make it a success. Though Mr. Raghav and Ujjwal has tried to reply to the queries raised during this session, yet in case you have any further questions, you may please send them to us in writing at sales@taxman.com. We will get the answers and send back to you. Thank you all once again. We shall soon be back with another vital topic. Till then, have a great time. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.